The fantasy football playoff round, the championships are being decided. There's one game left to go on Monday Night Football as the Lions face off against the 49ers. But we are going to talk today about what has happened thus far. Shawn, an interesting week, a strange week this time around with the holidays, with Christmas, with the games on Netflix, with all the way it was spread throughout the week. I feel like I've watched, games on end for the last month, it feels like, because you're trying to keep it on top of all these games, but usually it's kind of very condensed. You get a day or two of solid watching, and then you kind of have a few days off. This was like week 16 into week 17 all the way through to now, so we are letting the dust settle to see how things are sitting up, and it's shaping up pretty interestingly, pretty good. We're in a couple of good spots across our dynasty leagues, the inaugural, I guess we'll call it, Shawn, RotoViz Overtime Triflex League. We're in a pretty solid spot in that. We have an 81-point lead, facing off against a trio of players: Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Juwan Jennings, on the bums will always lose roster. They are the only team that can catch us, but that is in the range of possibility. But we're sitting in a good spot where you would like to be heading into the final game of championship week. We also have a team that we have Sam Laporta and Jameson Williams going against Amon-Ra St. Brown with an 8-point lead. That one, not as exciting, Shawn, but it is for the number one pick with the backdraw system at the FFPC, so we're hoping to secure that one as well. I feel like across the dynasty leagues that are still in play, Shawn, I feel like I'm facing Amon-Ra St. Brown in all of them, so that would impact how things go, and a couple of leagues where we're needing Gibbs to try and rack up a lot of points. I was talking to you before today's show. We are recording this prior to Monday Night Football. There was some conversation around the Lions and what this game means versus next week versus the Vikings after the Vikings beat the Packers, and now Monday Night Football not really having a bearing on the standings. I feel like this is one where Dan Campbell will roll out and try and get as much out of his roster as he can rather than sitting the team down. But we'll see how that plays out. If you're listening to this on Tuesday, you will know that and the impact. But it would be crushing to a huge amount of dynasty managers out there. I guess if you're facing the Lions players, it would be a huge relief. But that would be an impact at the end of a championship week that would be very unfortunate. Shawn, we're sitting here getting ready for the new year, the end of the fantasy football season. Myself and Connor O'Driscoll have a shot at a top 10 finish in the Best Ball Tournament. We were hoping for higher heights, but Matthew Stafford capped the limit on that roster, but it's in pretty good shape. It has Gibbs on it. It has George Kittle to try and add to the lineup, and a Jameson Williams. For people who haven't played best ball, obviously you have to knock the current scorer out of the lineup, so our best path there to additional points is through Jahmyr Gibbs. Shawn, it's an interesting time of the season. It's a high-pressure time of the season. I mentioned to you before the show that today my mood has been up and down regarding how the outcomes of these matchups will be, but it is what we play the game for, and that's why you want to come out on top when there's an opportunity to do that. How are you feeling here as we approach the final stages of championship weekend?
Good. Excited. The finals have been a lot of fun. Been very up and down. Colm, the playing games on all the different days has been a travesty. I don't think people generally in the community have enjoyed that. Certainly, some of the games played earlier and played in bad weather have been very, very poor. And if you had some of your stars who didn't get the normal amount of rest or playing on Christmas when obviously they prefer to be with family, all of those types of things.
Are the games been then, when the players did get to play, being absolute blowouts, and some of the fantasy stars like a Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson, getting pulled out in the fourth quarter, also not ideal for the NFL product?
No, it was very, very bad. It was a horrible advertisement for the NFL. Hopefully they'll rethink some of this, because
I'm kind of hoping it's a one-off with the way Christmas was on Wednesday. Now I haven't looked ahead, as in, does it go back to Tuesday? Is Christmas on a Tuesday next year, or is it on a Thursday? It's usually 1 or 2 days different. Shawn, let's hope it's not a Tuesday and we have to just do this for an entirety of time, because it is a long process, as I joked about at the start, to go through all these games in a week like this. People build up for their Sundays, across the world, not just across America, and you get Thursday night football, then you move into waiting for the action on Sunday then into the Monday games. But when it's spread out this long, and you mentioned the travesty, I think that might be fair.
Well, and at some point you're going to spend time with family, right? So if you're someone who does work in the community and they have the wall-to-wall games and you're responsible for all of that, I mean, on Christmas, I have family stuff to do.
My wife was joking with me this morning. She's like, I can't judge if it's going good, it's going bad. How's your team's doing? And I'm like, at this point, I don't really know. It's like
right. Well, and then you're like, well, okay, let's go find the game now. I have a spare moment, and you find out, well, it's no longer on Netflix, but it hasn't yet shown on the NFL Network, and stay up in the middle of the night to find out what happened and watch that game. It's horrible, right? Having said all of that, and you, as a fantasy manager, you have worked through 16 weeks, and you have had your heart and soul invested in these players and these individual teams for months and months, only to have it end abruptly in some crazy Bears Seahawks game that should never have existed like that. Now, you get into the specifics, and a lot of the things that happen in the game should not have existed. But that's just, it's not the way that it should be, right? Having said all of that, we've still got an amazing amount of fantastic football. This was a week where, and this has kind of been the story of the season, I think people would say, Shawn, you've been watching football for your entire life. That's been the case, more or less always. But the highs, Colm, the heights that we've gotten to with individual teams and players, and you think about the Sunday night game and how that ended, and you contrast that with the lows. They're so far apart, and so much of you wants it to be a case where we don't have teams traveling to play in Europe and having all of those garbage games. We don't have games in the middle of the week. We let teams play on Sunday when they should be playing, and you have Jayden Daniels versus Michael Penix, and it's extraordinary. Now, granted, Jayden Daniels and Michael Penix are not playing in all of the games, right? If they were, maybe you would get some more excitement in some other.
We need more Drew Lock, Shawn. We need Drew Lock out there because there was plenty of excitement from Drew. But we might get to that later.
Well,
but
the
I think
Indianapolis Colts are bad in every single facet and have one of the all-time worst defenses. You watch Brian Thomas, right? Who is one of the greatest rookie wide receivers that we've ever seen. Now, certainly not like top 5 or something like that, but sensational. And then you think to yourself, that Malik Nabers is an entire level higher. Like, what if he weren't injured? What if they had a real quarterback? And he's like, I'm not going to let Brian Thomas be the best, former LSU player in week 17. It's like, look what Malik Nabers.
Shawn, Malik Nabers' foot or toe seems to be like almost detached from his body, and he went for 171 and 2. I will also highlight on that second touchdown, I think the Colts defensive backs were trying to tackle each other. May have been where what went wrong there.
Well, there were a variety of plays across the NFL last week where you could see the defenders in the secondary sort of tracking the person with the ball. Like, I'm going to run next to him so that everyone knows kind of where he is. I've got a tracker on him in case any of my teammates want to come make the tackle. In many cases, they did not. No, I mean, we got extraordinary performances. Sunday was awesome, right? Was absolutely awesome. And Sunday is when the football games should be played. So we'd love to see that. Congratulations to so many of the people in the OT community. Hopefully we get the full Detroit Lions experience tonight. We have the RotoViz OT Guillotine 2 coming down to a fantastic finish between Adam, who is done, and Logan, who is projected for slightly more points with Jahmyr Gibbs tonight. It is Earthquake Magoon's Brain against Buttery. This is a great matchup in the Guillotine Finals. Thank you to everyone who participated in RVOT 1 and RVOT 2. Big thanks to everyone who participated in the OT startup with us. I think this league over the next decade is going to be my favorite to play. We had some active chat on the message board over the weekend, folks pointing out that among the final four, it was projected, I think, going into Sunday to be an exact dead heat. We did get the good fortune of having Jayden Daniels absolutely go off on Sunday night and give us a little bit of an advantage there. We got the big-ish game from Jordan Addison. We got the surprisingly big game from Wan'Dale Robinson, as we had put him in to avoid the Dorian Thompson-Robinson experience, which that turned out to be 12 receptions for 94 yards for Jerry Jeudy on the bench. But that, again, mostly a wash. Colm. Last week on Stealing Bananas, Ben and I explained how Jayden Daniels was even better and more impressive watching him throw the ball, watching him run the ball, than even his stat line indicated in this one. He has 227 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns. He does throw a pick, but he rushes for 127 yards. And that overtime drive after Michael Penix does his part and throws a flurry of insane passes on the final drive to force overtime. I mean, the Falcons should have gone for 2. I understand why they didn't. I desperately was hoping that they wouldn't, so that either way we'd get more points. There were a couple of key dynasty leagues, and we'll talk more about this going forward, but it was a fantastic dynasty final Sunday for me, and Bijan Robinson was going in a couple of the really important leagues. He didn't touch the ball again in OT because of the way that game ended, but what you're hoping for is either a lot more Jayden Daniels, a lot more Bijan Robinson, or both. We get more Jayden Daniels. Colm, was this not necessarily the best game? Obviously, it was a weird game. There was a stretch for almost 2 hours where the Falcons basically didn't touch the ball. Was it the most exciting game of the season? I mean, we had this and we had Bengals.
Yeah, I was going to say the Bengals, the way that game played out was pretty crazy. So you're going for the season. I was going for the week. I think between the two of those, they probably stack up at the top end for the entire week. We did get a lot of games this week that they were, very one-sided, or one team really performed, the other team didn't. You mentioned going for 2 for the Falcons. I was pretty convinced watching that Broncos game that Sean Payton called to go for 2. And then they had to review the touchdown to Marvin Mims, that second touchdown, and then they come back out and kick to go to overtime. I think in those situations, teams just they should be aggressive, go for the win. You mentioned with the Falcons there. Did you think that the Broncos should have went for 2 in their situation as well?
It's a little bit of a mix, right? When you're thinking about what the incentives are for the individual teams, I think when you have a mobile QB like Bo Nix, you should probably go. At the same time, the Broncos are a little bit more limited in the variety of plays they can run, despite what Marvin Mims did. And Colm, that was one of the most exciting things that we've seen in a long time. We do have him on some teams. We originally had him on this OT team. You were suggesting to pick him up early enough that we would have him again. We were trying to manage our roster spots such that we would get points in the various weeks. We did pick him up in the other one again after having him originally. I certainly wish that we had taken your advice on both of those. Even with that being said, I mean, it's basically Courtland Sutton, right? And the run element of it, when you have a bunch of running backs, but your run scheme isn't accomplishing anything, you're not a huge threat to run it from there.
Yeah, that's fair.
That part of it, I think, is tricky. The Falcons are in a different situation where Michael Penix is white hot. Bijan Robinson can get to the edge, gives you a lot of flexibility because you could hand it to him, you could pitch it to him, you could throw it to him. Certainly when you have a running back like that down by the goal line, someone who has both size and this incredible lateral agility, that gives you the opportunity. But Penix himself doesn't bring the run option. I think in a case where you have both of those things, certainly if it had been the Commanders tying the game and you have this unique weapon that is a Jayden Daniels, I certainly think that Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, those teams should go for it. Now, it's going to be a case in some of those instances where those teams are going to also feel like they are the favorite in almost all games that would go to overtime. And yet, I mean, one of the reasons the Jets game was, will go down in history as one of the absolute worst games ever played is that the Buffalo Bills have a terrible, terrible defense. And Aaron Rodgers was not able to get them in the end zone. We do get Tyrod Taylor doing some of that deep in garbage time to Garrett Wilson. That part was fun. The Ravens have also struggled defensively at times this year, although they have come around as of late and are looking like the second best team in the AFC after the Kansas City Chiefs. Bills fans won't be that happy with this segment of the show. Colm, the Falcons don't go for it, and they do not get the ball back because Jayden Daniels refuses to A, lose, or B, even throw it if he has any questions. They got the ball back for a split second there at the end of regulation, and his guys did not make catches for him. He seemed a little bit more reluctant to throw it after that, and yet still does make some big plays with his arm as well. I was blown away by this game. I would like for enjoyment, full enjoyment of these games, for the clock to occasionally stop. I think that with the current iteration of the NFL, that a defense should be able to have like 5 different like mini timeouts where they can just stop the clock if a team has run the ball like 3 consecutive times. We don't really want games like this where the Falcons essentially don't have a possession in the second half until the clock is winding down and Penix pulls out those crazy heroics. Because we do have overtime, you end up with 77 plays for the Commanders, 60 for the Falcons. That certainly, isn't low by contemporary standards. But this was a weird game where the Falcons controlled everything in the first half. The Commanders controlled everything in the second half. Colin, what about those Michael Penix throws on 4th down as he's leading his team back from the brink?
Penix, I think, there's certain points of the game where you're like, well, there's a rookie and there might be things to work on. That's obvious. He's, come in mid-season, played 2 games basically. I'm hugely impressed as well with their willingness to try and get the ball down the field. In terms of completions, there's a 31-yarder to Drake London, 23 yards to Kyle Pitts, 25 to Darnell Mooney. I think just he's coming in, and Kirk Cousins just before he came out of the lineup did look like he was really struggling, but the offense has improved quite a bit with that change, and I think Bijan Robinson has looked better as well with Penix there. But if you want to wax lyrical about Penix in a second, that's fine. I wanted to go back. I didn't get a chance, Shawn, to talk as much as you and Ben did on Stealing Bananas about Jayden Daniels, and we talked a lot about him at the start of the season, and it got to the point where we're starting off every show and we're like, Jayden Daniels is unbelievable. Jayden Daniels was incredible this week, and you try and get a balance on the show. So it's like I can't just keep bringing up Jayden Daniels at the start. We haven't done it for a few weeks, but the biggest change, Shawn, remember the rib injury in the mid part of the season? We've seen him rush less and less and less over the last 4 games. He's had 74 yards rushing. He's had 34 yards rushing, which obviously isn't huge, but had a rushing touchdown. He had a touchdown against Dallas in that 74-yard game, 66 yards against the Saints, 81 yards last week against Philadelphia, 127 this week. He's really taken it to the next level in terms of rushing the ball as a quarterback. And as well, you mentioned like the heroics of Penix on 4th down. with Daniels and some of the fourth down situations they had, and just a bit like you would see with Lamar Jackson, just fake the handoff, get him to the edge, he beats the man easily to pick up the first down. That was something the team wasn't doing enough of earlier in the season, and they've started to add that in. And the amount of times, like you mentioned the Jets, we've seen it with the Jets this week. They do a fourth down play, they hand it off, just runs into a wall, doesn't get the conversion. We see so many plays that like the decision to try and get a fourth down conversion is to run it straight up the middle. But if you have a quarterback like Daniels, like you were saying with Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and having them, like a lot of these quarterbacks, even a Bo Nix, get them out on the edge, and then you have the option to either rush it or to make that short, high percentage completion. But Daniels, Shawn, is really starting to put it all together. Earlier in the season, we were kind of itching for him to have this rushing upside added in. We've seen flashes of it then with the injury, then it peeled back. But he's also getting it done in terms of, the pass and total touchdowns. He had three touchdowns against the Titans, 2 against the Saints, 5 against Philadelphia, and then 3 this week again. So the numbers through the air have jumped dramatically versus what they were at the start of the season, when maybe some of those rushing numbers were helping, pad the overall fantasy scores. But he's putting it all together, and we're looking at rookie of the year. But at this point in time, and I know there's other competition that is well deserved. There's the talk of Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, and so on, and even a Joe Burrow with what he's been able to do. But Jayden Daniels, Shawn, is right up there already as one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. The interesting thing then is, like, we go back to what we were talking about with CJ Stroud this time last year, and is it a second-year leap or is it a sophomore slump when we get into 2025? But the Commanders fans have got to be absolutely ecstatic with what they picked up in this year's draft. The other question I would have on this game, Shawn, is a lot of people, the best ball final that I'm in with Connor O'Driscoll, Terry McLaurin, one of the higher owned players, and that he only had the 1 reception for 5 yards and 7 targets in this game. Olamide Zaccheaus looked like the second coming of some of the best wide receivers of all time. He had 9 targets, 8 receptions, 85 and 1. And we had Zach Ertz, Shawn, 6 for 72 and 2 touchdowns on 7 targets. People will know that I like to criticize Zach Ertz over the years, but this is not the time or the place to do that. He looked really good on some of these catches as well, helping out his young quarterback. What was your thoughts on the kind of the absence of McLaurin in this game, and a situation where like they needed him and that they did still squeeze out the win?
Yeah, I think that you need to play quarterbacks like Jayden Daniels, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson by themselves. Now, it's not the only way that it can work, right? But you think about even a player like Mark Andrews, who's scoring touchdowns at an insane rate, but is not going to match cheaper players like a Brock Bowers or a similarly priced player like a Trey McBride. You want to draft the best roster and be very tactical as you get those stacks in there. We tried to play Daniels without McLaurin for the majority of our teams. That worked very nicely. It's not going to always work. There was the game in week 15, right, which is the first of the 3-week sprint, and the hurdle that you have to get through in order for week 16 and week 17 to make any difference. And on that one, McLaurin was very close to a 200-yard, 3-touchdown game. So it could have worked out very nicely. He does get the 7 targets in this one. A few of the targets were barely off. McLaurin maybe gave you a little bit of a sense of why he profiles better as a 1B or a wide receiver 2 as opposed to the clear star. Certainly, I think it's perfectly fair. Anyone who wants to disagree with that. McLaurin, though, more of an air yards threat, which is perfect with Jayden Daniels, but they do need a true, or it would help to have a true wide receiver 1. I mean, you're talking about Jayden Daniels doing all of this with guys like Zaccheaus and Ertz, a player who is just a pure deep role player, and then, a 78-year-old tight end who, takes him about half an hour to run his route. Now, the reason that the Commanders love him, the reason he was a priority, is that he'll run that route to the right spot and then he'll catch the ball. And he did that in this game. But basically here you're seeing sort of a floor outcome for Daniels from a full year perspective, not in this particular game, but even in this game, right? They're under 6.5 yards per attempt for both quarterbacks. I think anybody who's a skeptic, anybody who would prefer for these guys to not be as good as they are, you can look at both of them and say, yeah, there were some theatrics, there were some certainly heroics, but both of them came in under 6.5 yards per attempt. They both threw picks that were pretty influential. Jayden Daniels takes the 5 sacks. That doesn't really tell the story of this game. I think when you look at the other side of it, you look at the Falcons side, one of the things that was cool to see is that Penix did understand who his star is. He peppers Drake London with targets. You get the 13 there. London fans have to be over the moon. You also have this brief and, potentially completely fleeting moment from Kyle Pitts where he looks like he's interested in playing football again. He went through a long period of time where he had Arthur Smith, a long period of time then where he has Kirk Cousins, who both look completely washed this year and didn't really want to get him the ball. I think all of those guys would tell him that a little more enthusiasm would have gone a lot way to drawing targets. But in this game, he does make the huge play, catches that touchdown, does seem more invested. They don't necessarily have a lot beyond that in the receiving game. I think Darnell Mooney fans certainly are disappointed. You think about some of the deep passing thoughts, and one of the things that certainly showed up is that Michael Penix threw a lot of deep passes last year. He wasn't actually very effective on those deep passes. These sort of deeper intermediate passes where you really have to drive the ball to the boundary, that might be the area where Penix ends up making all of his money as an NFL player. He certainly had some moments in the second half where he looked pretty overmatched, where he made some bad throws. There's a lot that he still has to go through in terms of his development. We have to give him that kind of time and space compared to the rest of these rookies. It wasn't a fantastic game overall from him. He's barely above 50% completions. At times, he didn't seem to understand or sense the rush. I don't know. You make the big time throws he made in the big time moments here. One of the elements when you go back and you look at his college stats and you realize that in most of the things that we're looking through, and we have, a big hat tip to Travis May when we talk through that and all of the research that he has done at RotoViz and elsewhere, Penix doesn't actually show that well in a lot of those categories, and he's an older rookie. So you want to keep all of those things in mind, but this game, again, kind of sends you back to what he was with the Huskies, where, they don't win this game, but he looks like a winner. That's something that, I don't know, we're certainly not getting from Caleb Williams. And I don't think you're really getting from Drake May either, despite the fact that, Drake May, if you throw him into this game, maybe he looks better than both of the quarterbacks, because with Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Darnell Mooney, Bijan Robinson, that's a little bit different environment than what he's working with in New England.
Yeah, it certainly is. And that was a little bit of a train wreck. And maybe when we get to Shawn later in the week, but some of these games, I think one of the things I was going to say when we were talking about the games over the week, usually, we come on, we're going to record the show. There's like 10 games you want to talk about. There's like 6 games that you're like, those games, they weren't great. But this week, all those games got full view because of the way the schedule was worked out. Going back, Shawn, to a couple of games just to see if you had any further notes on them. The Bills obviously completely beat down the Jets. We even get Mitch Trubisky in throwing one pass for 69 yards and a touchdown to Terrell Shavers late in this one. We do get a nice touchdown grab by Amari Cooper. I was impressed by the catch itself, but Keon Coleman just 3 for 27 and a touchdown on 7 targets. But I really like the hustle that he showed, the improvisation on that touchdown reception, gets up in a kind of crowded area, takes the ball down in a situation when the game wasn't completely done at that particular time. Garrett Wilson, you mentioned earlier, got in the end zone late in this one. Tyler Conklin gets in the end zone late in this one. Both of them having, very good fantasy days. Nothing else really to speak of across the board. Josh Allen does what Josh Allen does, got into the end zone, got his 2 passing touchdowns. James Cook gets in on a short rush. He has 53 rushing yards in this one. I don't have a huge amount of additional bits to add, Shawn, other than, the Jets have a lot of problems at the moment. and they have a lot of work to do this offseason. The Bills are in good shape here as they head towards the playoffs. Anything else stand out, or can we jump on to the next one?
Keon Coleman did look good, and he also looked bad. I mean, this is the guy who...
This is Keon Coleman, Shawn.
Right. I mean...
Play to play can look very good or very bad.
Well, I mean, he's a highlight machine, which is one of the reasons that the Bills wanted him. He's very inconsistent, dropped an easy pass in this one, almost makes a circus catch for a touchdown on another play. I do think he's going to emerge as their big-time wide receiver one over time. I don't know that that's even going to be in the 2025 season. This team may not really set up to do that. This is a team that probably will be frustrating, a little bit like the Zay Flowers experience has been. Certainly if you drafted Mark Andrews really early, you've been bailed out by the touchdowns, but the lack of volume has been endlessly frustrating. And that's within the context of offenses that are incredibly explosive. You mentioned the touchdown pass from Mitchell Trubisky. I mean, Tyrell Shavers ends up as the guy who leads the Bills in receiving. Now, part of this is that because it just goes back to the Jets being non-competitive, but the Bills scored 40 points and did not have a receiver catch more than 3 passes. I mean, are you going to be able to play any of these guys in the future? The one player who looked like he might rise up and be a good bet for this season was Dalton Kincaid. And I mean, he's basically been Mark Andrews without the touchdowns, which is unplayable. So you go through that and you are worried that there's essentially nothing there that's ever going to be startable on a game-by-game basis. I don't know. I mean, the players who go on to be stars almost always, certainly not completely the case, almost always were able to command more volume in college than Keon Coleman did, and or will certainly flash better immediately in the NFL like Terry McLaurin did, the player we were just talking about. But you see the number of points that are available in this offense, and you could look back in a different parallel version of this season. James Cook doesn't do very much because he doesn't get in the end zone. He doesn't break off the big plays. He's very efficient still, right? But I mean, James Cook hasn't just been efficient. He has been so hyper efficient that it boggles the mind. You remove some of that, and he's a disappointing player. Well, next season, he could be disappointing, and Keon Coleman could be the guy who ends up as a league winner. Still holding out some hope for that. Garrett Wilson, Colm, 7 for 66 and a touchdown. Thank the fantasy gods for garbage time. Yes, let's move on to the next one before we say things we regret about the New York Jets.
The next one, I'm going to jump in here and do it a little bit different. I have 3 games, Shawn. I have 3 players that I wanted to highlight, and going to get your thoughts on maybe you want to dive into some more than others. I know there's one name, Shawn. It's basically setting you up to talk about Bucky Irving, but we're going to start off with Jonathan Taylor. He has 32 carries for 125, 2 touchdowns, and that losing effort to the New York Giants. Also had 2 receptions for 11 on 4 targets. Could have one of those targets down in the red zone. Kind of don't know if the timing was off or he just didn't turn around, but the ball hits him in the back, so it could have been an even better fantasy day. But over the last couple of weeks, it does look like maybe health-wise might be getting all the way back. He's done it with both quarterbacks now. Joe Flacco obviously starting this game. I thought that Taylor looks like a much better version of himself than he had done previous to that time. The other one, Shawn, we don't slip him in too often, but he's had a historic season. We have to mention him. Saquon Barkley in a game where there was no Jalen Hurts, and then there was no Kenny Pickett for the last portion of it. He gets 31 carries for 167 yards. He is on the way to, some absolutely historic numbers, depending on how the season finishes up next week for him. It'd be interesting as well, with the way the scenarios I mentioned, the playoff seeding and so on. Maybe the Eagles don't go all in on Barkley, but I feel like he might want to get those. He had 2 targets, 2 receptions for 2 yards, all the 2s on that one. But he is looking fantastic. He took that offense on his back, and this one they went 41-7. Cooper Rush kind of coming back down to earth in this one. Trey Lance did get in for 1 pass for 1 yard towards the end of it. Jalen Tolbert getting the sole Cowboys touchdown. But Shawn, Devontae Smith, 6 for 120, 2 touchdowns, and this one was also down at the 1 yard line at the end of the second quarter with a 49-yard reception. So it could have been again even bigger, but a massive day for him. And then AJ Brown saves the day with a receiving touchdown, but 3 for 36 and a touchdown. Sometimes they're not getting those numbers with Hurts in the lineup, so it was still positive with the QB changes to see both of those guys be effective. And the last running back, Shawn, I want to highlight is Bucky Irving, who had almost 200 total scrimmage yards. Shawn, 4 for 77, a long of 42 through the air, 20 for 113, long of 34 on the ground. The big dagger, Shawn, for any Bucky Irving managers out there, I'm sure they're listening in, was the play, ruled a touchdown, down at the 1, his foot was out. The team that myself and Connor has, it was actually a Devontae Smith and Bucky Irving roster. Those additional 12 points would have helped a lot on those 2 plays down at the 1. Ends up being a Mike Evans touchdown after that play. But Bucky looked fantastic, just didn't get in the end zone to, really super seed that day. But Mike Evans, 8 for 97, 2 touchdowns on 9 targets. With 40 total rush attempts, Shawn, in this game for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for 202 yards. So they were running all over the Carolina Panthers. Bryce Young, 2 passing touchdowns, 203, but he does put most of that the way of Adam Thielen, 5 for 110 and 2 touchdowns on 6 targets. Again, players like a Zach Ertz that, maybe liked at the start of their career, and then I became more and more critical of. Adam Thielen has wound back the years over the last couple of months, really helping that quarterback in Young to take a step forward in his second season. Through those games, Shawn, any notes or highlights other than Bucky Irving that you want to talk about? But I will let you talk about Bucky Irving.
Well, Colm, I noticed how you did that Eagles game and talking about Saquon Barkley taking the team on his back. He had an excellent game. It was a make yardage game to try and get him records, which I am completely in favor of. The team should definitely have done that.
Well, the second part of it was we have Tanner McKee at quarterback, who did throw for 2 passing touchdowns, but he threw 3 completions, 4 passes, and it was kind of like, Kenny Pickett's out of the game now. We need to get off the field, please.
But Devontae Smith is the player who took the Philadelphia Eagles on his back. And
trying to give Saquon credit, Shawn, for having a historic season. It's something that I'm trying hard to do.
Well, yeah, he's been extraordinary. Smith, someone who
Smith's right there.
Anyone other than Jalen Hurts,
he's in that Addison category. He's like, he may never be a true wide receiver 1, but he's like one of the best wide receiver 2s in the NFL.
Well, I mean, again, it just kind of depends on your context, right? I mean, Devontae Smith and Jordan Addison are far, far better than Terry McLaurin. And that's kind of how you want to have your offense built, to where your number 2 receiver is one of the best in football. It's one of the reasons that the Philadelphia Eagles are 13-3, and one of the reasons the Minnesota Vikings are 14-2. That offensive dynamism allows you the flexibility from a tactical perspective to do so many other things within the game. And I mean, you look at that from the perspective of, I don't know that it's impossible that Devontae Smith will always be buried behind AJ Brown. I think these are pretty equivalent players at this point. I've been making that case for a long time. I think when he gets his chances, he always shows out like this. I mean, if he goes ahead and gets that additional yard, he seemed to think, and the commentators seem to think, that he was clear enough that he wasn't going to get there. That's in no way, shape, or form a criticism of AJ Brown. He makes a touchdown catch where the play is wiped out by a penalty. He makes a second non-touchdown catch, but in the corner of the end zone where he can't get a second foot down, but he goes up one-handed and just looks larger than life. Obviously, you make those plays and everything else changes, but we're not that far away from talking about a 3-touchdown game from AJ Brown. When you look at the overall dynamism of this offense with guys like Kenny Pickett and Tanner McKee pulling the trigger, I think it does raise some uncomfortable questions about the level that Jalen Hurts is playing at. And that even includes the fact that I mean, if you're a Saquon Barkley manager, you're looking at this historic season and being like, come on, I mean, what is happening here? We get a sneak from Kenny Pickett. It's like, just give him the ball. He seems like the ultimate team player, an amazing person in addition to being just an extraordinary athlete. The Eagles have had a few hiccups with the receivers getting frustrated at the offense, but Barkley has appeared not to get frustrated at his lack of touchdowns as he goes over 2,000 yards. That doesn't happen by accident. He's been extraordinary. The Philadelphia Eagles, the Detroit Lions, the Minnesota Vikings, those three teams are incredibly fun at the top of the NFC. I certainly think that they are a match for the Chiefs, the Ravens, and the Bills.
And I have to pivot back, Shawn. You didn't mention Bucky Irving, so I have to.
Well, Bucky Irving has been the best running back in the NFL this year in a season where Saquon Barkley has gone for 2,000 yards. Every time that he runs, he makes these little moves that the commentators refer to it as gliding. It's better than that. It's more intuitive than that. It is that plus, right? And yes, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, just like the Philadelphia Eagles, are fantastic run blocking units. They set their guys up to potentially make these big plays. The advanced stats for Bucky are even better than the raw numbers, which have been extraordinary for a guy to come in to the NFL and to objectively be small and slow, and to do what Bucky Irving has done, and to do it week after week after week. Colm, you mentioned things like Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, and getting pulled. If you're, hilariously, if you were playing Kenny Pickett, and not hilariously, he has an injury there, but there was more that he could have accomplished. Bucky Irving could have gone for 250 in this game if the Carolina Panthers had put up any fight on their own side in the second half. You mentioned that they ran the ball 40 times. Baker Mayfield also throws 32 passes. You probably can't say that they were looking for ways to not embarrass the Panthers. I think they were fine with embarrassing the Panthers. But, when you're going for 6, 7, 15, 20, 30 yards every single play, they run 74 plays to just 46 for the Panthers. They gain 551 yards. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers would tell you, if you can just spend all of your time in the NFC South, you will look like the best team in football. That doesn't completely do them justice either. However, they are one of the two teams that have defeated the Detroit Lions.
Yeah, other than what you mentioned, Mayfield's passing, he did 5 passing touchdowns, 359 yards passing in this game. So I have to give him a shout out there as well. We will get to the Vikings Packers and the Wednesday edition of the show, but I did see a picture circulating, Shawn, referring to Carolina when I believe it was 2 seasons ago. Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield, both on the roster, both looked not good. Leading the NFL in passing in 2024. So the environment can mean a huge amount, as we've talked about, but Baker playing aggressively in this one gets the 5 passing touchdowns. And with that in mind, I mentioned the 2 touchdowns to Mike Evans. We've talked a couple of times recently about Jalen McMillan. He gets in the end zone twice again, 5 for 51, 2 touchdowns. So he continues his late rookie season breakout. But that is going to get us to the end of the first edition of RotoViz OT this week. Good luck on Monday Night Football. Hopefully the points and the scoring falls in your favor to bring home that championship, or whether you're in some best ball tournaments, etc., that it goes your way to maximize how your season finishes off. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at @OverToMarlin. My co-host is Shawn Siegele. Check out all of Shawn's work on rotoviz.com. And in case you don't get to listen to the show on Wednesday, I guess I better mention this now. It's almost 2025. So happy New Year to everyone listening in. And until we are back, have a good one.